The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the email that had just landed in my inbox. My heart sank with each word I read, confirming what I'd feared most. I wasn't invited to the company's annual awards ceremony, the same ceremony where they would be honoring the marketing team's unprecedented success this quarter, a success largely built on my groundbreaking campaign that had tripled our client acquisition numbers. I'm Alexandra Hart, though everyone around here just calls me Alex. For the past 5 years, I've poured every ounce of my being into this digital marketing agency. I can still remember walking through those glass doors on my first day, fresh out of business school, armed with nothing but a degree and an unshakable belief that I could revolutionize the way brands connect with their audiences. And revolutionize we did. Under my leadership, our department transformed from a struggling cost center into the company's primary revenue driver. But here I was, sitting in my corner office, overlooking the city skyline, feeling like all my sacrifices had been for nothing. The long nights spent perfecting campaign strategies, while my peers enjoyed happy hours. The weekends I dedicated to analyzing market trends instead of visiting my family. The countless times I put the company's needs before my own health and well-being. All of it seemed meaningless now, reduced to a single line in an impersonal email chain, award ceremony attendees list. What stung most was knowing that Mark, my direct supervisor and the man who took credit for my ideas more times than I could count, would be up there on stage, accepting accolades for work he barely understood. It wasn't just about recognition, it was about respect, about acknowledging that my vision, my sleepless nights, my relentless pursuit of excellence had fundamentally changed the trajectory of this company. As I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink mockingly in my draft email window, I couldn't help but reflect on how things had gone so wrong. When did my dedication become invisible? At what point did my contributions shift from being celebrated to being expected, then finally to being taken for granted? The question gnawed at me, making my stomach churn with a mix of anger, disappointment, and something far more dangerous: resignation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my options. I could accept this slight and continue playing by their rules, hoping someday they'd see my worth. Or I could fight back, though I wasn't entirely sure what that would look like yet. What I did know was that I couldn't let this stand. Not after everything I had given to this company. Not after proving time and again that I was willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. The thought struck me suddenly, like lightning illuminating a dark sky. What if I could turn this rejection into my greatest opportunity? The idea began forming in my mind, growing stronger with each passing second. I opened a new email draft and started typing, my fingers moving faster than they had in months. This wouldn't be just any email. This would be my declaration, my moment of truth. And as I wrote, I realized that sometimes being banned from the party is exactly what you need to change the entire game. The memory of my first major campaign still burns bright in my mind, though it feels like a lifetime ago. It was during my second year at the company when they handed me what everyone considered the poison pill account, a struggling fitness brand on the verge of bankruptcy. Most of my colleagues had already written them off, but I saw potential where others saw failure. Night after night, I pored over consumer data, identifying patterns that even their internal team had missed. I discovered that their core customers weren't just looking for workout gear. They were searching for transformation stories that resonated with their personal struggles. That insight led to our breakthrough, Rise Together campaign. We didn't just sell products, we created a movement. Real people sharing real stories of overcoming obstacles, finding strength they never knew they had. The results were staggering. Within 6 months, we increased their customer base by 400% and turned them into one of our most profitable accounts. But the real victory came when I received letters from customers saying our campaign had inspired them to make positive changes in their lives. The pattern repeated itself with every major project I touched. When the pandemic hit, I spearheaded the Digital Bridge initiative that helped local businesses transition to online platforms. While other agencies focused on short-term solutions, I insisted on building sustainable e-commerce infrastructures. The program saved dozens of small businesses from permanent closure and earned us recognition as community leaders. Yet, despite these achievements, my name rarely appeared in company-wide announcements or press releases. Perhaps the most ironic part was watching others benefit from my innovations. Remember the AI-driven customer segmentation tool I developed? The one that reduced our marketing costs by 35% while increasing engagement rates? Mark presented it at last year's industry conference as his own creation. He even won an innovation award for it. When I confronted him, he simply smiled and said, "Alex, you're part of the team. Team achievements are shared achievements." As if having your work stolen could ever be justified as team spirit. The worst part wasn't even the lack of credit. It was the subtle ways they tried to minimize my impact. Like when I suggested implementing a mental health support program for employees, only to have it shot down as not financially viable. 3 months later, HR rolled out their own version, complete with a fancy launch event. Or the time I proposed expanding our diversity initiatives, only to be told we needed to focus on core business objectives. Now, those same initiatives are featured prominently in our corporate responsibility reports. These experiences taught me something crucial about corporate culture. Visibility matters more than value. You can generate millions in revenue, but if you don't play the political games, if you don't master the art of self-promotion, your contributions will always be overshadowed. I learned this lesson the hard way, watching less talented individuals climb the ladder while I remained stuck on the same rung, regardless of my actual impact on the company's bottom line. And yet, despite all this, I stayed. Maybe it was pride, or perhaps some misguided sense of loyalty. Or maybe, deep down, I believed that eventually the quality of my work would speak for itself. How naive I had been. The invitation snub made it clear that waiting for recognition was a fool's game. If I wanted change, I would have to create it myself. The email notification sound broke my concentration. Another reminder from HR about the upcoming ceremony. My jaw tightened as I minimized the message, returning to my draft. The words flowed easier now, fueled by years of pent-up frustration and determination. What started as a simple response to my exclusion was evolving into something much bigger. Each sentence I wrote felt like shedding layers of professional restraint, revealing the raw truth beneath. I remembered the first time I truly understood the power of authentic communication. It was during a particularly challenging client meeting 3 years ago. Everyone else was throwing out complex marketing jargon, trying to impress with technical terms and elaborate strategies. But when it was my turn to speak, I chose a different approach. I told a story about how their product had personally impacted someone I knew, about the emotions it evoked, about the human connections it could foster. The room fell silent, and in that silence, I saw understanding dawn in their eyes. We secured that account not because of our impressive metrics, but because I spoke from the heart. Now, as I crafted this email, I drew upon that same authenticity. I wasn't writing to complain or accuse. I was writing to illuminate, to shine a light on truths that had been buried under layers of corporate politics. Paragraph by paragraph, I laid bare the reality of my contributions, not as a laundry list of accomplishments, but as a narrative of growth, struggle, and unwavering commitment. I included specific examples of projects I'd led, challenges I'd overcome, and the measurable impact of my work on the company's success. What surprised me most was how cathartic the process felt. With each word, I shed another layer of the professional mask I'd worn for years. I wrote about the late nights spent perfecting campaigns while my colleagues were home with their families, about the times I'd sacrificed personal opportunities for the sake of meeting impossible deadlines, about the quiet moments of triumph when a strategy worked perfectly, only to have someone else take the credit during presentations. The email wasn't just about me, though. I wove in stories of other team members whose contributions had been similarly overlooked. Jane from Analytics, who had developed a revolutionary tracking system but never received formal recognition. Carlos from Design, whose creative genius had transformed our visual branding yet remained anonymous in official communications. By highlighting these shared experiences, I hoped to create a collective voice that would resonate beyond my individual grievances. As the document grew longer, I found myself questioning traditional notions of corporate success. Was it really about climbing the ladder, accumulating titles, and attending ceremonies? Or was it about making meaningful impact, fostering genuine connections, and staying true to one's values? Each question led to deeper reflections about my own career path and what I truly wanted from my professional life. The physical act of writing became almost meditative. My fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, each keystroke releasing years of accumulated tension. The office grew quieter around me as evening approached, but I barely noticed. Time lost meaning as I shaped my thoughts into words, words into paragraphs, paragraphs into a powerful testament of my journey. The email was no longer just a response to an exclusion. It had become a manifesto of everything I stood for, everything I had fought for, and everything I hoped to change. When I finally looked up from my screen, the city lights twinkled below, reflecting the emotional clarity I felt inside. This wasn't just about getting revenge or proving a point anymore. It was about creating a moment of truth that couldn't be ignored, a catalyst for change that might ripple through the entire organization. As I saved the draft and leaned back in my chair, I realized that sometimes being excluded from the party gives you the perfect vantage point to see the whole dance floor clearly. I hesitated before attaching the quarterly performance report to my email, not because I doubted its importance, but because I knew how explosive the information within it could be. The report contained irrefutable evidence of my department's contributions, detailed analytics showing how my campaigns had directly influenced a 275% increase in qualified leads, a 190% rise in conversion rates, and a 310% boost in overall revenue compared to the previous year. These weren't just numbers. They represented thousands of hours of strategic planning, execution, and optimization. Throughout my tenure, I'd maintained meticulous records of every project, every success metric, every client testimonial. In a world where corporate memory often favored the most recent presentation or the loudest voice in the room, these documents served as my insurance policy against institutional amnesia. I attached not just the latest report, but a carefully curated selection of case studies, client feedback, and before and after performance snapshots that painted an undeniable picture of my team's impact. The most damning piece of evidence, however, wasn't in the numbers themselves, but in the timeline they revealed. Every major success the company had celebrated in the past 2 years aligned perfectly with my strategic initiatives that had been met with skepticism and resistance at every turn. The board's recent decision to focus on emerging markets, that had been my recommendation 18 months ago, documented in an email thread where I was explicitly told to stick to domestic strategies. The pivot to video content that had supposedly saved our social media presence, that was my emergency proposal from when engagement rates were plummeting. As I reviewed the attachments one final time, I couldn't help but think about the countless meetings where I'd presented similar data, only to watch it get watered down or attributed elsewhere in official reports. There was the time I'd identified a critical flaw in our customer retention strategy, complete with a comprehensive solution, only to see a diluted version of my plan implemented months later under someone else's name. Or when I'd flagged a major security vulnerability in our data collection methods, only to be told it wasn't a priority, until it became a headline-grabbing breach that cost us millions. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern of systematic marginalization that went beyond mere oversight. The evidence showed how my warnings were consistently ignored until crises forced action, how my innovations were shelved only to reappear later as others' ideas, how my successes were absorbed into the corporate narrative without acknowledgement. Each attachment told a story of contribution met with resistance, of progress achieved despite obstacles, a value delivered in spite of indifference. I added one final document to the email, a chronological timeline I'd created over the years, mapping my key initiatives against the company's subsequent actions. It wasn't just about proving my worth. It was about demonstrating how systematically my contributions had been appropriated, delayed, or dismissed. The timeline revealed a corporate rhythm. My ideas would be initially rejected, then gradually adopted as others' concepts, always timed conveniently to align with reporting cycles or executive reviews. As I prepared to send the email, I realized that these attachments represented more than just proof of my work. They were a blueprint for understanding how corporate structures could simultaneously depend on and diminish their most valuable assets. The data told a story that transcended my personal experience, speaking to a broader pattern of organizational behavior that prioritized optics over substance, hierarchy over merit, and appearances over reality. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the very tools of corporate documentation, reports, analytics, and procedural records to challenge the system that had created them. In a way, it was poetic justice. The same mechanisms that had been used to marginalize my contributions would now serve as the instruments of revelation. The evidence wasn't just supporting my case. It was telling a story that couldn't be spun away or explained off as coincidence. I paused before adding the final recipients to the email. Beyond the obvious targets, senior management, the HR department, the board members, I carefully selected individuals who had witnessed my journey firsthand. Longtime clients who had benefited from my strategies, industry contacts who had seen my work evolve, former colleagues who had experienced similar treatment. Each name represented a thread in the larger tapestry of truth I was weaving. Then there were the unexpected additions. Influential figures in the company who had occasionally shown support, but never publicly acknowledged my contributions. Their inclusion wasn't accidental, it was strategic. By looping them in, I was giving them a chance to either stand with integrity or reveal their true colors. The email would force choices that couldn't be avoided or delayed indefinitely. As I finalized the distribution list, I reflected on the delicate balance between escalation and explosion. This wasn't about creating chaos. It was about initiating controlled disruption. Each recipient had been chosen for their position in the corporate ecosystem, their ability to influence change, or their vested interest in the truth coming to light. Some would see this as a threat, others as validation, and a few as a call to action. The timing of the send became crucial. Monday morning, precisely when the weekly executive meeting commenced. I imagined the scene. Executives gathering in the boardroom, coffee cups in hand, ready to discuss quarterly projections and operational efficiencies. Then, the simultaneous pings of their email notifications, each one delivering a carefully constructed package of revelations that would transform their routine meeting into something far more significant. I knew the risks. Careers had been ended for less than what I was about to do. But I also understood that calculated risk-taking was essential for meaningful change. This wasn't reckless rebellion. It was strategic confrontation. The email wasn't designed to destroy, but to dismantle, to break down the walls of complacency and force a reckoning with reality. Its power lay not in aggression, but in illumination, not in accusation, but in undeniable evidence. As I hovered my finger over the send button, I realized that this moment represented everything I had learned about corporate power dynamics. Success in this environment wasn't just about working hard or producing results. It was about understanding how information flowed, how decisions were made, and how influence operated behind closed doors. The email was my masterclass in applied corporate strategy, using the system's own mechanisms to effect change from within. The anticipation was electric, a mixture of fear and exhilaration that made my pulse race. I knew that once sent, there would be no turning back. The carefully constructed facade of corporate harmony would crack, revealing the tensions and truths that had been buried beneath layers of protocol and procedure. But more than that, it would force a conversation that had been avoided for too long about value, recognition, and the true cost of success in corporate America. In that moment of suspended animation, with my finger inches from changing everything, I understood that sometimes the most powerful moves aren't the ones that follow the established rules, but those that rewrite them entirely. The email wasn't just a message. It was a movement waiting to happen, a spark that could ignite change far beyond my immediate circumstances. The moment I pressed send, a wave of calm washed over me. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from resignation or defeat. It was clarity. For years, I had played by their rules, hoping my work would speak for itself. But now, I was taking control of the narrative. The email wasn't just a cry for recognition. It was an invitation to the company to live up to its own values. By mid-morning, the ripple effects began. My inbox flooded with replies, some supportive, some defensive, and others downright hostile. Clients who had benefited from my campaigns reached out privately to express gratitude. Former colleagues shared similar stories of being overlooked, but said they'd never had the courage to speak up. Even a few senior executives sent terse acknowledgments, asking for further discussion. But the real turning point came during the executive meeting. Unbeknownst to me, one of the board members, a woman named Patricia who had always seemed distant and unapproachable, had been quietly championing change within the organization. She used my email as the catalyst, she needed to push through long overdue reforms. During the meeting, she presented my timeline and data not as accusations, but as evidence of systemic inefficiencies holding the company back. That afternoon, I received a call from Patricia herself. Her tone was measured but firm. "Alexandra," she said, "your email has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths, and while your approach may have been unconventional, it's exactly what we needed." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. The company launched an internal review committee tasked with addressing issues of recognition, credit, and career advancement. Transparent metrics were introduced to track contributions more fairly. Most surprisingly, Mark, the same supervisor who had repeatedly taken credit for my work, was reassigned to a different division. When I bumped into him in the hallway, he avoided eye contact, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. As for me, I didn't just get invited to the awards ceremony retroactively. I was asked to host it. Standing on stage that evening, microphone in hand, I felt a sense of vindication that went beyond personal satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point anymore. It was about creating a culture where everyone's hard work could be seen, valued, and celebrated. During my opening speech, I chose my words carefully. Success isn't just about numbers or accolades, I told the audience. It's about people, about recognizing the effort, creativity, and passion that each of you brings to this company every single day. Tonight, we honor not just achievements, but the individuals behind them, the unsung heroes who keep this organization moving forward. When I called out Jane from analytics and Carlos from design, naming their specific contributions, the room erupted in applause. Seeing their faces light up reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. It wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. In the months that followed, I was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, a newly created role designed to ensure innovation and accountability across departments. More importantly, I became a mentor to younger employees, teaching them how to advocate for themselves without losing sight of collaboration. The company transformed, not overnight, but steadily, as leadership embraced transparency and merit-based recognition. Looking back, I realized something profound. Sometimes being excluded isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Being banned from that ceremony gave me the perspective I needed to see the bigger picture. It taught me that true success isn't about climbing ladders or collecting trophies. It's about leaving things better than you found them. On a quiet Friday evening, months after the ceremony, I stood in my office, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd made a difference. And that, I decided, was worth every sleepless night, every sacrificed weekend, and every ounce of determination I'd poured into this journey. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the ending you expect. Sometimes, it gives you something far better, a new beginning.